Welcome to the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week I've got Ian Jeffries on as my guest. He is the NSCA President-elect. He will continue that title through the remainder of the year and on into 2024 before he takes over the title of NSCA President from the existing person right now. Now we're going to jump into a whole bunch of things, including his path to getting to be NSCA President, his background in rugby, speed development, and a whole bunch more. So, I hope you enjoy the show.
How are you, my friend?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm well, although I wish I had a haircut like yours. That's quite nice.
It's a little harsh, probably. I only did a couple of days ago. I only get, do you know when you're so busy, you can only get there every now and again. So you kind of go for the harsh one and then it lasts a little while.
I imagine you are quite busy.
It's, considering everything should be dying down a little bit, it's been rather busy of late, quite a bit of traveling. So I got a little bit more, and then I've got a little gap before another hectic spell, just end of November, early December.
And is that because of your coaching, or what is it that fills up your calendar most of all?
It's mainly education these days. I'm actually not doing a massive amount of coaching anymore. It's one of those, you need to be consistently at a place to be able to coach effectively. So I've kind of eased that down the last few years and got more into coach education than anything else.
Oh, wonderful. So now coaching the coaches, more or less.
Yes, especially with my kind of game speed workshops that I'm fortunate enough to be doing around the world. Those seem quite popular and just keep me sufficiently busy. It's not something I'm marketing heavily or looking to do, but I have enough requests at the moment just to keep them ticking over.
And is it rugby centered or multi-sport?
No, they're multi-sport. It's one of these workshops I can make sport specific should I need to, but generally they're generic. They're looking at concepts and general methods which people can then take in a sport specific manner. It's looking at the underpinning movements that surprisingly are common across multiple sports.
Beautiful. So the concepts of coaching, the underlying concepts, and not the specificity. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
Brilliant. Well, I thought, I don't know if you've ever listened to this particular podcast, and I won't be offended if you say no, but I just have organic conversations.
Don't be offended simply because I don't tend to listen to podcasts at all.
Nor do I.
So it's probably a sign of age, I would guess.
A generational gap, maybe. Yeah, I don't listen to too many.
Quite possibly, yes. So I apologize in advance that I'm kind of not au fait with formats and how they should run and so on. So if I go completely off script,
well, that's the whole purpose of this, at least, is for us to just have an organic conversation, have one topic perhaps overflow into another. It gives me insight and a learning experience for me. So I just ask questions that I'm curious about, and it turns out that people are of the same mind and they're wondering the same thing often. So we just go with that.
That works for me. That works
for
me.
So just officially now, you are the NSCA president.
Not yet. I am the president-elect.
So do you have to go to the White House or something and there's a parade? How does that work?
It's not quite as grand as that. But no, it at the conference next year, I think it's at the awards banquet that they have on the Friday evening. That's where there's a kind of a formal handing over from Brent Alba, who's the current president, to myself. But one thing that the NSCA have done which is infinitely sensible over the past few years, is to have this president-elect position. So I think years ago, and now I don't know exactly when it changed, but years ago you used to kind of take over immediately. You were elected on that Friday and you took over that Friday evening, which meant that you had this kind of limbo time where,
Mhm.
right, what's happening? What's going on? What are the priorities? What do I need to know? And it meant that you probably spent 6 months or so just getting up to speed, which in a 3-year term is quite a significant amount of time lost. So what they brought in then was this president-elect situation where they brought the election forward a year, which meant that the incoming president now has a year to get themselves up to speed, so that really they can hit the road running in July next year. And ironically, I've just come back from Colorado Springs, where we had our board inauguration, kind of just to show how the organization works and so on. So it was nice to spend some time with the other incoming board members and to get an idea of the size of the NSCA and all the various working mechanisms that we don't often see when we just turn up at a conference.
Yeah, I got to say that the Colorado Springs and the headquarters is gorgeous. Just right there at the bottom of the mountains. And of course, you got NORAD off in the distance. I'm sure they pointed that out and all that. But the facility itself, the layout, it was wonderful. Now, with the board members, are they going through the same process as the president-elect?
They actually take over immediately.
Uh-huh.
So this was the first time. I think we tried to get a time where everybody was available, and as you can imagine, from July through with vacations and various work commitments, this was the time that everybody could make. And they welcomed me with some fun, not just a great welcome personally, but some fantastic weather as well.
Mm.
I believe it was unseasonably warm in Colorado Springs this past week or so, which for a man from Wales is always very much appreciated.
So let's talk a little bit about that. The man from Wales. You grew up in Wales. What town in Wales?
I'm from a very small town called Brecon in mid Wales, so
And
very
growing
few
up,
people have heard of it.
you
Growing
played
up in the
rugby?
same area, actually in a I spent my childhood in a village, an even smaller village, about 9 miles from Brecon, and I've pretty much lived here all my life, and absolutely love it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, obviously, you got into sports and you've been very much into rugby. What sparked your interest in that, and how did that spark turn into an inferno of what
Oh
has
gosh,
been?
I think whether there was a time when it became an inferno. My parents would probably say it was an inferno from day one. I was very lucky. My dad used to play top class rugby, so we were always from a sporting family. So my memories of childhood are playing sports formally and just as important, I think, informally. If there was anything out, I would probably try it. So I can remember spending my summers days playing rugby, football, cricket, tennis, track and field. And little did I know that I was probably doing this multi-sampling that is recommended now, but it was just what we did, I guess, at those times. So I there wasn't a huge amount of formal sports. It was probably 11 or 12 before I got into formal sports and teams and so on. We played a little bit of school sport, and I loved them all. So I was fortunate. I played what we call county level football, cricket, rugby, track, and then made a decision at 16 where you probably have to start specializing. That rugby was probably the game I was that little bit better at.
Is it, and do you think it's because of body type and size? I mean, we've looked at that over the course of strength conditioning research and so on. Like for myself, I stand just above hobbit level. and for that,
Same level as me, I think.
most of those that you just described would be sports. Like for myself, it was more individual, whether it be gymnastics or wrestling. It just so happened that I have that strength level in the gym setting that I really excelled when it came to weightlifting for my size. So is that why you went with rugby? Partly because size?
Potentially, I think I just had this. I wouldn't say I was exceptionally fast, and that's always knowing that I could get faster has probably been one of those things that's driven me for so many years. But I had, I think, a level of athleticism and an ability to just beat somebody that lent itself to rugby probably more than other sports, I would guess. And I think being brought up in a family where rugby was almost a religion, that also kind of shaped the way in which my sports career went.
Well, rugby is slow to the States here in terms of popularity, but it's gaining traction. It's definitely is not nearly as much as, say, football or soccer, however you'd like to term it, but definitely it's on its way, especially with the advent of the sevens. What do you think about the sevens?
Oh, the sevens was probably my favorite form of rugby, but we didn't play it a lot.
Why is that?
15s, sevens was very much a start of season and an end of season event. So 15s has always been dominant, and it still is dominant. But there were always these end of season sevens tournaments where you could travel, and that was really what allowed me to exploit probably my more natural strengths, because I'm not the biggest person there was, but I liked space, and obviously on being played on the same size pitch with 7 players rather than 15 players, there's quite clearly a lot more space, and brutal in terms of the fitness requirements, sevens, because it's so anaerobic in terms of the number of repeat sprints that you need to be able to do. There's no hiding place in it, but it just allows the expression of skills that I love, and the advent of it into the Olympics is changing rugby. I've been fortunate to travel around the world and see how countries that perhaps wouldn't be able to compete at 15s level, it's much easier to quickly develop sufficient capacities to be able to compete at 7s level.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. So just in your timeline, there came a point where perhaps the athlete became the coach or the trainer. When did that occur for you? And was it primarily in rugby, or was it across the spectrum for all sports that you started training?
Because rugby at the top level was, for many years, amateur. It was the same as track and field. So you played kind of top level rugby, but you had to have a job. So my job was a school teacher. Which meant that you were naturally coaching multiple sports. So the coach has always been in there, I guess. It's, so the differential between player and coach was never as clear as it is now, where you have your playing career, you can become professional in the rugby. Whereas for me, I was a teacher by day. On the weekend and in the evenings, I was a rugby player.
So, and how much of your teaching background and your education within being an educator carries over into the coaching aspect? Is that partly what you teach?
Massively. It's a very interesting thing with strength and conditioning. I'm not saying that anything is necessarily better. It's just different. If you look back at a lot of the older strength and conditioning coaches, quite a few come from an educational background.
Mhm.
And I just think they have a different outlook and a different skill set than somebody who comes from a more scientific background. So if you look at the most modern strength and conditioning coaches, they've gone through sports science courses. They've gone through formal strength and conditioning courses. A lot of people in the old, I'll say the olden days, were often PE teachers who had a bent for the strength and conditioning field. And I'm not saying better, I'm just saying different. It's a different perspective on what you do. You come from an educator background rather than a purely scientific background. And I think if we can blend those and bring some of those skills back and blend them with the outstanding science that we now know, it could be where the sweet spot of strength and conditioning coaching actually lies.
So with the educator, what I'm hearing, and correct me if it's not quite accurate, but there's the psychology of change that the educator brings in, where the scientist is a bit more linear with a specific plan in mind.
Yeah, I think if you've ever been in front of classes of individuals, some who love being there, some who do not want to be there for 1 minute, you realize that the challenge of organization, the challenge of motivation, the challenge of bringing the people to the activity is a skill that actually is essential for strength and conditioning. Because we often presume in strength and conditioning that everybody is going to come in and give of their best and buy into everything that we do. Nothing could be further from the truth. We have those athletes, but we also have athletes that it's the very same scenario that you face every day in teaching. And it just develops those the emphasis on how you communicate, how you organize, how you structure things. And I've always seen training programs very much as an extension of academic syllabuses and schemes of work where you need to be able to do one thing before you move on to the next. And again, I think those skill sets have left me in good stead to be a coach. And when I look back, I realize that those experiences in teaching have been absolutely crucial to my experiences in coaching.
Yeah, I can see that. I can truly see that because there everyone has a style of teaching, but there could be substrata of that style, especially if you understand the student that's in front of you. Now you can potentially generalize
Yes.
different subgroups and say this person falls into this category, and I'm going to attempt to teach or coach utilizing this approach compared to this group or person over here. And then there's probably those that are really quite fine tuned and know how to deal with every individual and not necessarily put them in a box or a group. How
Yeah.
is it that you do that?
Um, Very, very difficult one to answer, I think. And I'm very fortunate over the years to work with a number of very, very skilled educators. And sometimes I'll even catch myself saying things or doing things. I think I know where I got that from. We all borrow skills and so. But what also fascinated me was seeing the individual come to one class and be totally motivated and go to another class and not be, and always fascinated by why. What is it that that person could unlock that others couldn't? And that's always been that fascination. So if you ask me how I do it, I probably couldn't tell you. But when you I think the danger in coaching and in teaching is that we will always we'll veer towards those who are showing interest, whereas quite often it's those on the periphery that we need to focus on, because they often dictate the way the whole group goes. I
Can
think
you
in any
provide an example? Can
so
you just something that comes to mind?
in any group, I think you will have those who will do whatever you say. They love it.
Okay.
You have those who are going to show very little interest, but you also have this middle group. Now, if you can pull this middle group towards the former, those ones of real interest, you've got a functioning group. If they fall towards those who have very little interest, you've got a non-functioning group. And those are often the people that you have to convince. This is why we're doing this. You know, giving a reason, giving how it helps them in relation to what they want, rather than what necessarily what we want. And I think what I've learned is that sometimes the communication of science is not necessarily the most emotive and the best communication mode to persuade those critical people who will dictate the way that the whole group goes.
So how do you assess a group of whether it's athletes or coaches that you're educating or coaching? How do you make that assessment when you first get there? Obviously, it's going to be an ongoing kind of thing, but how do you establish those groups?
Absolutely. I think if we think with our strength and conditioning hat on of assessments, we're going to look very much at the physical assessments that we would do.
Certainly.
I think there has to be a level of assessment before we even get to that. Right. And you will have seen it with clients who come in. Is this person up for this? Is this person somebody who needs me to motivate them, or is this person going to be somebody who is going to come in, they're going to be reliable, they're going to turn up, and so on. You can sense that from the way a group walks into the gym or onto the field. What's the energy level? Who are the key people who drive that? You look at the kind of the subgroups. Who are the alphas? Who are the people who are going to lead this? So even before you've started doing anything physical, you've started to take in the nature of this group. And that then guides not just what you do, but how you do it. What do I need to instill into this group? How am I going to act in order to get that? And so on. So it's a very informal assessment. Sometimes you will have you know, if it's a sports situation, you will have chatted to people who've worked with these athletes before, for example. What are they like? Do they take to this? What gets them going? What exercises do they like? What exercises don't they like? And so on. We would do it in school. What's this group like then? You know, so it's a very similar thing. And I think sometimes we don't pay sufficient attention to that more emotional analysis or kind of a social analysis. We tend to go straight into our physical analysis because that's what's drummed into us from our scientific education.
So are there activities, some type of team bonding, I don't know what we would call it, are there pre-activities before the strength and conditioning occur that you encourage coaches to do to not only suss out the outliers, the leaders, the alphas, and so on?
I'll often use warm-up activities. Obviously we have to get through certain content and we only have a certain amount of time. But again, looking at the type of motivations of the group, and we have so sometimes they're a very social group, so that way we can run activities that have a lot of interaction within them. Sometimes they are a driven group, there you've got to show how this activity is going to lead to high performance and so on. Sometimes you face not so much with sports teams, but in school situations, and probably in client situations such as you have, they're there for a little bit of enjoyment.
Yes.
So if you've got a group that is there really just to perform, they want to win, the warm-up may look very, very different than a group that's there for that little bit of social activity, that little bit of fun. And it's trying to ascertain the motivations within the group. And that plays into actually the structure of the sessions that we do.
Yeah, I could see how that could be. So in my mind, I'm kind of thinking about those individuals that don't want to be there. Of course, you don't want to ignore them. You don't want them to fall away, because potentially they could become great athletes. They just need the right
Oh, yes.
motivation and
Oh, yes.
stimulation. So how do you, because in my head, those are the people that I want to go to convince them that this is going to be great for them. And I will, almost to the point of neglecting all the others, I will spend so much time and energy. And I know that's not the best approach to take. I want to try and encourage everyone to rise up with the tide, so to speak. So how do you draw those individuals from that end of the spectrum into the fold? Any kind of tips?
I think ultimately it depends on communication. There are normally reasons behind people's behaviors. And what we've got to do, I think, as effective coaches, is dig as far as we possibly can without obviously intruding. There are going to be barriers that, you know, we don't necessarily want to cross. But what is it that is shaping their attitude and their belief in these activities? Sometimes it's just bad prior experiences of strength and conditioning. So for example, a lot of people don't like the weights room. They don't find it a comfortable environment. Now, if that's the dominant feeling within a group, I may not start the sessions in the weights room. We may go on the field and do a warm up out on the field. Interesting, when I talk to a lot of soccer teams, is that it's often the perception of what strength and conditioning is that is the biggest problem. So I typically start with those type of teams with speed and agility work. Mm-hmm. Because if I ask most footballers, right, what if I could give you a magic bullet, some magic physical capacity, what would it be? And it's typically speed and agility work. Most players say they want to get faster. So suddenly I'm on their side, because I'm saying, right, what we're designing this program around is making you faster. Mm-hmm. So that kind of, I thought strength and conditioning was all about heavy weightlifting and heavy squatting and deadlifting and things. And we say, yeah, that's a part of it. But this is where I want us to start. It's drawing that horse to water, isn't it? It's understanding what their thoughts are and trying to give them an activity that addresses that, so that they can say, this is working. Now, why would I go in the weights room? Well, the idea is that every time you put it to the ground, it has to absorb force, it has to repel force. If we can make it a little bit stronger, etc., etc. Whereas you compare that to, right, we're going to go straight in the weights room and do some lifting.
That's a one-way conversation. Yeah,
it's exactly. I haven't tried to get to an understanding of their perspective before imposing what I want to do on them.
Brilliant. So I love that. And you can draw in people because you're continually giving them feedback as to, we're doing this because it's going to
Yes,
get you toward your
that's
goal,
it.
and
And I
everything
think
relates around that.
giving reasons seems to be a very powerful, persuasive tool. We're not just doing something because we are doing something to achieve this goal. And yes, ultimately, I believe in strength. I believe in strength and power, but I don't have to ram it there straight away. You know, I can achieve gains in strength without even lifting weights in the early phases of training.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so sometimes we have to kind of put our goals back for the longer term objective of actually getting somebody to really believe in strength and conditioning.
I think if we look historically, we'll say that the world of strength conditioning was actually all bold upper caps strength with a 72 font, and conditioning was
Yes, yeah,
lowercase and maybe a 6 font. It was so overpowering with strength and conditioning
yeah.
that
And
now it's
if
starting to balance out.
absolutely, and if you go back to the original incarnation of it with Boyd at Nebraska and all of that, it was a logical thing. You know,
Yes.
it started with American football. There is no doubt that mass, strength, power are critical components of American football. Now, if you can, it's if you look at the leverage point, if you've got somebody who doesn't lift weights on a regular basis and you start them on a very simple, consistent lifting program, they're going to get bigger. They're going to get stronger. Chances are, if you don't mess it up, they're going to get faster.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to transfer perfectly to American football. But maybe not perfectly transferring into other sports, your baseball, your tennis, and so on, where other capacities are equally as important.
Agreed. Yeah.
So you know, in that original incarnation, strength in that big font was totally logical, especially when it was already a weakness because people weren't as strong as they could possibly be. So you know, the first mover advantage that Boyd took in Nebraska was hugely successful, and quite naturally people followed it. But once everybody is at that level, we have to look for different potential advantages.
Well, I think
And
that's
it's
where sports science is coming into play, to show the program designer that it's more than just the weight room. We need to get them dealing with this aspect of athletic performance and this aspect and
exactly,
so on. So it's not diluting, if nothing else, it's spreading and becoming a lot more expansive in the tools we can use, rather than a weight plate, a kettlebell, or a dumbbell.
exactly. And it's uncanny in that if I go back, what we originally talked about, 16, I was starting to specialize in rugby.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in rugby lifted weights.
Really,
So, oh yeah, it was frowned upon.
it would slow you down.
It would, yeah, we had that myth of slowing down. And remember, it was still an amateur game, so people tended to do their rugby training rather
Mm-hmm.
than the additional training. So I remember thinking, well, if I want to play at the highest level, I'm going to have to be stronger. I'm going to have to be bigger. I'm going to have to be faster. If so, I got into strength and conditioning from trying to address those needs, and there was very little information out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what was out there was from American football and from track and field.
And yeah,
And
bodybuilding.
track athletes were lifting weights, American footballers were lifting weights, and despite the fact that I was told on numerous occasions I shouldn't be doing it, I continued to do it, and I continued to get faster.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my love strength and conditioning to an extent that probably by the end of my rugby career, I preferred the training part of it than the rugby part of it.
And is that because of just the virgin territory in which you were exploring,
Yeah,
or
I
was it
think
the
so.
injuries? Was it the blunt force trauma?
Oh, I tried to avoid that as much as I possibly could. There were people much bigger and stronger than me. You can probably tell from the shape of the nose. I wasn't perfectly successful in it, but it was the unknown territory. I was fascinated by the difference this stuff was having on me. I was in my own lab, so I would try absolutely everything, every training method that came over. I would try it out and say, I like this. No, not so keen on this. And it was all based on, I've got data that goes back years on just very simple jumps, sprints, lifts, and so on. And I figured out what worked for me and what didn't work for me.
And here you are. We're sitting at the awards ceremony last July in Vegas. You get the election for becoming president of the NSCA, now officially president-elect, which you'll take on the torch. And you have visions, you have aspirations, you've got potentially a direction that you would like to see the NSCA heading in. Hopefully it's in a not too much of a veering of the course that is currently on right now. But how about that? If we can just talk a little bit about what are you bringing to the table? This is not like a sermon or a pulpit speech or anything like that, but what are you excited to do there?
First, Rocky, it's unbelievable. So I've been a member of the NSCA since 1989, since I first heard of it, simply to get the journals and get the information. I did the CSCS as the very first time it came to the UK. And
when was that? When did that happen?
It must have been late 90s. I mean, it had only been available in the US, and because of my rugby commitments, I'd never had the opportunity to travel to it. I retired from rugby in 98. So that kind of it coming to the UK at that time was fantastic. And then I attended my first NSCA conference in 2000. And it was just this unbelievable experience where the people you'd read about, the people you'd seen in the journals and everything were there. And you could sit with them, listen to them, even talk to a few of them. And you know, this gold mine of information. And for my journey in the NSCA, I have to thank a group of high school coaches who are my longest and dearest friends in the NSCA, because they took this strange talking person under their wing and said, come with us, come and have breakfast with us, come and have meals with us, chat. I was obviously teaching still at the same time. And I learned so much from them. Not necessarily in methodologies, but just in structures, how they got so many people in and out of the weights room in a single day. And I learned the power of good people. And, you know, one of the highlights when I go back to the NSCA every year is just to meet the same group of high school coaches, people like Chet Stevenson, Larry Meadows, Scott Sally, Bruce Harback, Dave Cater, who are my oldest friends, and I still learn so much from them. So to be president of this organization is absolutely unbelievable. And I feel so honored to have that, and thank everybody who put their trust in me in giving me that. In terms of direction, I don't think it's a massive veer, but I want to probably re-emphasize the role of the coach, how we actually apply the brilliant science that we're producing, because it's at that delivery point that everything makes a difference. And I want to talk to people not just within the NSCA as well, but without, to get a direction of what does the NSCA need to do to further strength and conditioning as a real profession that people can come into and make a fantastic living and make a huge difference. And those are probably the things, because I've been very lucky to travel internationally, and strength and conditioning is a relatively well developed field in the US, relatively well developed in the UK, but it's relatively new but potentially thriving in a lot of different countries around the world. And I think the NSCA can play a massive role in helping develop the profession internationally as well as within the US.
I'm thinking Japan, Italy, South Korea, India. Are these the areas you're thinking of?
Those are areas that what the NSCA already has a presence. But I'm thinking more any area that wants to develop a bigger presence for strength and conditioning, the NSCA can assist, because I learned simply how much I learned from going to those early conferences, from talking with people, how much trial and error it saved me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because I knew about the NSCA. Now, if the NSCA can have presence or events in different countries, what it then does is provides a fulcrum around which people can coalesce. They can chat. I saw it in Germany. They had the global conference in Germany. And yes, there was some fantastic information presented by the presenters that they had. But just as importantly, it gave the German coaches an opportunity to meet each other, to make plans, to say, what are you doing? Where are you doing it? Could we meet up? And so on. It just plants seeds. And those seeds over many years, if they're appropriately watered, will amount to something. So, I've seen the UK strength and conditioning profession in the UK go from a few random people like myself to a well-established group with strength and conditioning degrees, and with many sports organizations now employing strength and conditioning coaches.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because within at least the American professional sports leagues like the NHL, the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, and soccer, what I'm noticing, especially with the guests that have been on previous episodes here with Zealous, is that a lot of the titles are changing within the team structure. Yes, there is a strength conditioning coach, but they're often changing the title to performance director or something of that nature. Is that kind of a concern, that the title of strength conditioning is I won't say fading, it's just morphing into something that's that they feel is more all encompassing when they say performance director?
Obviously there has to be some level of concern, but I also see it as a massive opportunity. I remember writing something for the Strength and Conditioning Journal a number of years ago. I think it was the high school column, how to make a strength and conditioning coach indispensable. And if you look at the knowledge of performance that most strength and conditioning coaches have, it's far bigger than quite often what the roles dictate. And by extending our influence, I think we can emphasize the critical role that physical training has, not just in terms of the physical parts of performance, but the impact it has on psychological performance, the impact it has on technical performance, tactical performance, and so on. How the environment in which we create impacts training, impacts adaptation, and so on. And if you think about it, if we were just, oh, he's just the strength coach, we limit ourselves. So I think we need to see this as an opportunity, but we need to emphasize how the knowledge and skills that we bring make us ideal if these new positions are going to be called different things.
Yeah,
I guess
I mean, go ahead.
So if we go back, would we call ourselves strength and conditioning coaches today? I'm not convinced that we would. You know, if you go back to Boyd's initial incarnation of the strength coach, that became strength and conditioning when it was realized that, oh my God, we play a much bigger role than just making people strong. But we went strength and conditioning just to keep the SC element of it. If we were going to reinvent the profession now, we would call ourselves something I think completely different, like an athletic development coach, or you know, a performance coach, and so on. So I think it's morphing, which is a good thing, but there are going to be a lot of different people with different skill sets coming into that field, and we need to be sure to sell what we have in relation to the performance director. And this is just an observation rather than a something that's concrete. But I've seen situations where the performance director is from a more physiotherapy background, and I've seen situations where a performance director is from a more strength and conditioning background. Those departments often look very, very different. They have different underpinning philosophies, which then, you know, make them very difficult in the way that they act every day.
Yes, yeah, I could see that. I know of a couple myself that I could just give as examples, but I could also see the NSCA giving, there's so many certifications compared to when we first came into the NSCA, you in 89, myself in 92, and at that time it was just CSCS, and then in 93, 94 they came out with the CPT, and now we've got the coaches certification, we've got sports science, we've got special populations, there's more tactical, exactly. And I could see there being a performance coordinator / performance director kind of credential that pulls from all of those fields in a manner that is, I would say just an amalgamation of all those things that for those that are in the professional, Olympic, collegiate level that are really coordinating all the staff members underneath them. Yeah.
Now, whether that looks like a credential, I'm not necessarily convinced, because I think you will always get such a diverse type of person who's going to take that role. So you could get somebody who's predominantly a psychologist, somebody who's predominantly a strength coach, somebody who's predominantly a physiotherapist. I think what we probably need to do a little bit better is make us aware of the impacts that those areas have. So again, go back to my teaching profession. I'm probably more aware of the impact of psychology, of pedagogy, than maybe somebody who's coming out with a very traditional sports science background. And maybe at a higher level, once we've got our basic, we need to be looking at a much more interdisciplinary approach to developing the performance director, where they're aware of the potential impacts and then can exploit specific experts in those various fields.
Yeah, I could see two fields right now that could be brought into the fold within the NSCA from my own, biased opinion, would be sports psychology, mental skills, that type of thing,
Yeah.
and proper and nutrition, dietitian, fueling experts of sorts, which is something that has remained kind of separate from
It is
strength conditioning.
And if you think about it as well, the way in which we meet keeps us separate. So
Yes.
we will go to the NSCA conference, or we will go to a Perform Better summit or something, which tends to be like-minded people thinking the same way. The psychologists will go to their annual conference. Nutritionists will go to theirs. So never the twain shall meet in instances like that. And maybe we need events where we pull these people together.
I'll be there.
It's going to be one of those funny ones where not every session is going to be of interest to us, but there could be ones there that actually have the biggest impact on us, because, oh my God, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, and it takes us in a whole different field. How we do that, I have no idea.
Well, you've got a year to learn.
I got a year to learn. Interestingly, I was talking to a good friend of mine, Dilip, in India, and he runs Gaio Fitness Academy, and that's something that I've talked to him about, is how do we develop these interdisciplinary events where we can, as a coach, we can learn about the latest from the world of psychology, from the world of pedagogy, from the world of behaviorism, etc. You never know. One day.
All right. Well, from your lips to reality, let's make that happen. Ian, I can't thank you enough for putting aside some time. It looks like it's a beautiful day in Wales there. And
it's not bad. We
yeah.
As is typical for Wales, we had a little rain this morning, but it's cleared up this afternoon.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to when we get together again, whether it's
I'm looking forward
next year at the conference or whenever that might be. I know that with my educational path with Setanta right now, I'll be coming over to the UK, or at least to Ireland, sometime in April. I know that you're not really working with Setanta these days. You've got your own course, but who knows? Maybe we'll be in the same neighborhood come this spring.
You never know, dear.
Well, I can't, again, thank you enough for coming on. Congratulations. It is an honor to know you and an honor to have you lead the NSCA, and I'm looking forward.
Thank you very
where
much.
We go.
Rocky, the feeling is mutual. We only really met each other at the conference last year, and it was one of those situations where you kind of feel as if you've known each other forever. And
yes,
and that's the beauty of this industry, I think. It's full of people like that.
Well, it was a great feeling, and it was mutually felt. So thank you so much.
And that's it for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Ian for coming on. Anytime we have a conversation, it sure does turn out to be something special. I'm just glad you guys could enjoy it with us. In the meantime, follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. You can go to the website, RockySnyder.com, find out about speaking engagements that are coming up in the future and the courses that are online that are offered there through the website. And while you're at it, maybe just check out Return to Center, a book I wrote during COVID, all about how to centrate the body for rehab, return to play, and strength conditioning, utilizing the typical gym setting. Until next week, go make it a good one.